So, welcome to the show today. Today, I have Thomas Landis on the show, and Thomas is the Chief Digital Officer at Andermatt Swiss Alps. And I'm very, very excited to have you here for the second time, actually, because we've done an interview like this quite a few years ago, I think, when you were still at F10. And things have changed a bit, and I'm super happy that we get to do this now once again, because things have changed quite a bit for you as well. So, thanks for being here and taking the time.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for having me here again.
So for those who haven't seen your last interview, let's maybe dive a little bit into your journey so far. Can you share a little bit about, your background, who's Thomas, and what's sort of like the journey been so far to where you are today?
Sure. I'm actually kaufmännische Angestellter by example, meaning that's apprenticeship I did in the commercial job. I started actually in a construction company. People say because I was too lazy to write a good recommendation letter. And then I landed actually in banking and started to do my bachelor thesis on economics. And I have studied and have a master's in corporate innovation management. And basically innovation, this is what I did the last few years. For example, before coming to Andermatt Swiss Alps, I was plus minus working for more than 8 years in the SIX group on several jobs. One of them was, for example, innovation lead, which was a product which was called Paymit, which is now Twint. And the other was actually then I was the head of F10 incubator and accelerator, because we found out during the Paymit project or the Twint project that actually as a stock exchange or payment provider, we are very much regulated and we are very slow and very risk averse, but somehow we need to fail faster and found somebody who can fail fast. And those were the startups. And that's why I actually said, well, we have to do corporate innovation together with startups. And this is actually what I've done. And then I've chosen to go up to the mountains. Last June, I'm now since almost 9 months in Andermatt. And it's been quite a challenge. Maybe I can explain a little bit about Andermatt. We are the project some of you might know from Sami Zawiris. He's a Egyptian investor. He was actually once asked if he would be interested in buying land in the Swiss Alps in Andermatt, where the army was there for probably a century or so. So some of you probably know Andermatt from the military. And he actually, this little town was so dependent on the army, so they didn't know what to do with Andermatt. So there was a guy, he was a former ambassador for Switzerland in Egypt, and they asked him, hey, don't you know Sami Zawiris? He has built cities in the forest. In the desert. Couldn't he do something similar in Andermatt? And as the legend is Sami Zawiris went there once and said, yes, I could do it, but I don't want to beg for it. So if the Gemeindeversammlung says yes to it, then we're going to do it. And this is actually how it started. So 15 years ago that started. Now you know probably Andermatt from the Jetty Hotel, which is one of the most famous 5-star hotels in Andermatt. The ski arena belongs to us, going down to Cedron and Disentis. It's about 180 kilometers of slopes. Still very nice powder if you want to go skiing. Then we have 2 hotels. We have about 10 multifamily homes where you can buy a real estate, for example, like this one in my back, if you have a little bit of extra money. Or we also have restaurants. So meaning I once calculated during the COVID crisis when we tried to organize our COVID organization prior to skiing season, and we have 152 customer touch points up in Andermatt. So that's actually what it makes it from my point of view so exciting, because we have a little bit of everything in our group. Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit more about the change that you made. Obviously you're a very passionate, enthusiastic person. Obviously, if that hasn't come through, then I don't know what. Talk to me a little bit about, banking. You've been in banking a while with SIX, and now changing kind of like industries, right? And the sector that you've been in, and I'm pretty sure dynamics are very different right now as well. But also the size of the organization is very different. The structure is probably very different than at SIX. Talk to me a little bit about that change. What was where did that motivation come from to go into this direction, or was it just a random act of chance?
No, actually, I was a random act of change because honestly, when I left F10, I was supposed to travel for 4 months, and I made it to Costa Rica for a week, where mainly spent my time booking my flight back because of COVID. And so then I was back home. I had 4 months of vacation planned, and actually we were in lockdown. And I had a lot of time thinking a little bit what I shall do as a next step. First of all, I was actually planning to not work until the end of the summer, but then those plans actually changed due to the COVID crisis. And so I had actually time to really apply for jobs which I thought they might be interesting. And one of those jobs I applied was actually because as the head of F10, I pretty much understood the future of mobility, because one of our corporate members was Baloise, the insurance company, and they have understood that in the year 2040, mobility will be totally different. And out of this knowledge and reading those white papers they wrote about the year 2040, I applied for a job as being the head of the Zürcher Verkehrsverbund, meaning the trailways of the canton of Zurich. And actually what I wrote was a big script about why in the future the leader of that company must be a person who understands collaboration and innovation, because the mobility of the future will be totally different. And so I sent in this big recommendation letter and didn't hear anything about for a month. And after 1 month, the headhunter called me and said, well, probably the Regierungsrat, well, the government disagrees, because this is a job which is actually signed out by the government. Probably they disagree with your point of view, but we studied what's kind of interesting. Would you be interested in working in Andermatt? And actually my first reaction was like, well, if I don't have to move to Andermatt, I have a look at it. And once I went up to Andermatt, actually, I learned how interesting this is. I mean, I always understood that there is something magic going on, because how is it possible that a non-Swiss person is able to buy almost 1 million of square meters of land in Switzerland, bypass some laws, and building up a new little town in the middle of the mountains? And since it was lockdown, I had actually also the time, I traveled up to Andermatt, looked at it, and saw how much of a greenfield this is and how much leapfrogging I can do. And I totally don't have any background in tourism or in real estate, but since I was actually asked to become the chief digital officer, I understood actually, I mean, a customer journey is probably in a digital way the same if it's in a bank or if it's actually in a tourism organization. You don't want to have these media changes. You don't want to have cumbersome UX, etc., etc. And this was a lot of things I could bring in. And on the other hand, if I look at what are the key trends for Andermatt Swiss Alps, it's also digitalization. It's about how can I use data better? How can I deal with a lot of people in peak times and things like that? And so I could reuse a lot of things which I did in my former jobs, and could bring this into my new job. So of course, structure is different, organization is different, investment will is totally different than in banks. So this is actually what is different between those two jobs before. But I can really reuse a lot of things. For example, I've already done some proof of concept with startups I was working with in F10 before. For example, we brought up a chatbot which helped the customer to answer questions about Andermatt the region. We brought in a startup which digitalized the whole restaurant process of doing takeouts, which was very much needed in the lockdown of the restaurants, etc. So I could actually really reuse a lot of things I did in my previous jobs.
Cool. Very interesting comparison also that you made, especially also coming from the digital world, looking at different industries, and not seeing any blockages, but more seeing like commonalities. That's really, really interesting. I want to dive into a topic that you already touched at the surface, topic of innovation, more specifically the topic of human-centered innovation, because that's something I'm really, really fascinated about, and I always love to hear people's perspective. So first of all, you've seen a lot, you've experienced a lot. So talk to me about how important is it to put the human being in the center of innovation?
good question. Or can I ask the question differently?
Yes, please.
What is a shitty product? Actually, a product where the user cannot use it, it doesn't solve a problem, the existing process is actually more cumbersome than before, it's more expensive, it doesn't add any value. And that's actually the reason why you have to do it human-centered, because it has to solve a problem. It has to be easier than the existing process. It has to be very easy and very frictionless for the customer. And that's why you have to put the user in the center, because I mean, especially if I think of going to ski somewhere, you don't probably choose the ski arena because of how easy it is to buy your ticket online. But if you can't buy it online, I bet you that actually you will think twice if you really want to go there and wait 1 hour in line for getting your ski ticket during the COVID situation. So yes, I mean, it's everything you have to really think of. Is from my point of view, how can I make the life of my customer more easier? And this starts with human, actually putting the human in the center of it and the customer in the center of it. Yeah.
And that, talk to me about the business opportunity here, because, you know, I talk to a lot of people every week who are in situations where, you know, they're sort of in between the customer or the user and the business as well, right? And, you know, the business or the management often, you know, obviously demands ROI. And then, you know, we talk about really short timelines. So are we really talking about innovation? If we already know what the outcome hopefully will be exactly. And on the other side, we have, you know, customer needs, user needs. We have to focus on the human being there, understanding and serving those needs. Talk to me about where is, like, does it actually, like, monetarily make sense to focus on the user? And if so, why does it?
Mm-hmm. Well, the question is probably, when should I focus on the user? You know, first of all, I really must understand what is the problem I try to solve and what is the real problem of it. And then how can I make sure that actually I do understand what is the customer's journey who needs to solve that problem? And how can I make those people around that problem understanding that this customer has the problem? And very often it's a problem that the customer does not understand that he has this problem. How can I make people aware of that? For example, if we go back to mobility, I mean, if I think of the year 2040, if all the cars will be autonomous, why the hell should I, as, for example, a hospital manager, now care about that? Well, if I just look at it, I don't see a reason. But if I really deep dive into, hey, what are the changes to that? For example, autonomous cars means connected cars, means less accidents. Less accidents means less people have accidents, meaning I don't have any, how is it called? I don't have any livers or hearts from victims out of accidents, which I can transplant them into people who maybe are in a need of a liver or a heart. So, meaning for me, as a hospital director, I must now understand that this trend might have in the future an effect on me getting something I get today by accident, literally. So why do I need now to understand, what about 3D printing? Could this be actually the future of it? And how can I get? And those are so complex things in different ways. I mean, this is very, very tricky to make people understand. Yeah. And very often I see more and more time is missing to really think of, hey, what are the consequences coming now of this change and this trade? And this is sometimes very important that you have quite some guys who are really doing nothing else than thinking about really how the future could look like. And what I learned, especially in the banking and the insurance industry, well, in the insurance not as much, but in the banking, people don't have that time anymore, or they are not given that time to really think of, hey, what is probably happening in 20 years with humans or with us or with our business or with the trends, etc., etc.
Interesting perspective, especially going from the outside, it looks like, oh, it's not going to impact me. But then if you consider the whole spectrum and you really deep dive into what's happening today, how are these processes working and how may this now impact these processes in the future, it could, generate a very different picture. Mm-hmm. Now maybe we can pick this example, maybe another one, but what I'm also very interested in is, what is your recipe for convincing management when it comes to investing in something that makes sense to some people and maybe doesn't make sense to others? Basically, when we talk about maybe, pursuing new business models or just things that may very well not, turn a profit within the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the main recipe is actually trust. If I think back, when I was rejoining Six and starting Paymate, which led then into Twint, actually, I was very lucky because 3 years before I was working already in Six, and I left the company, and the guy who was actually replacing me, he was not doing a lot during my 3 years of absence. And after 3 years being somewhere else, I came back to Six. And actually, my bosses were still there and the problems were still the same, but 3 years have passed it. And they know that actually in the past, I've done things, I've done innovation, and I've been away and nothing has happened. So this gave me a lot of trust from my managers. And then it was also the ability to ignore management very often and smile and say, yeah, this is like your opinion, but this is very delicate, it's not very much liked, and it's also very tricky that you can somehow duck and go around as it. So if I think of Twint, how often our management tried to kill it, it's probably like 15 times, which different kind of manager would have tried to kill it. And actually there were reasons why they need to kill it, because it was not in their goals, it was not in the P&L, it's actually not in their focus, because they had other goals which they had to fulfill. And I think especially in that, I was very lucky that my boss, or my former boss, who was the CEO at that time, he somehow protected me. And of course, there was this situation sooner or later, it got more important, the whole project, and there were a lot of fathers of this project, and everybody has invented it together with you. But I mean, this is something you get paid for as an innovation manager. So it's there. I think you need to understand when is the moment to let go the idea for the better good of it, and then give it to others who can bring it to the next level. And I think this is probably part of the recipe which you need to have to really make innovations grow. But it starts with the trust that people do believe that your crazy idea you talk about might be effective sooner or later. And then you need also the time to show them very quickly how you can do it. For example, what would be if there is a tipping point of the idea of Twint or Paymate? Probably, I remember actually our CEO asked me, hey, could you come to the group board and introduce Twint to our top managers and tell me exactly what you need as a next step? And I said in this meeting, well, I would need 250,000 Swiss francs to develop a prototype. And so what we did is we prototyped in an app, a prototype where bankers could send virtual money, which didn't exist, from A to B. So there was the first minimal viable product we had, transferring billions. And they added zeros after those ones and transferred trillions of virtual money from A to B. But they understood how easy it is to do a peer-to-peer transaction. And then this was the moment when they understood why this could be a game changer, why it's important that we start with the product that is not generating a revenue for the banks, the peer-to-peer solution, and start with it. But it was the prototype which really showed them and which made it very usable for them, actually. And also to internally then discuss about, well, Six tries to do that, we should be on board, because there will be probably a new market in that. Yeah.
That's a really good one. I mean, if I just try to structure a bit in my head, I mean, the core principle that I think I heard from you is trust. But then how you go there, one way of going there is prototyping is a great way of building trust, because you can show something, you can show it in the context of their goals, of what they want. You can show it in the context of the business. You can show it in the context of the business model as well.
And what's also important is that human centricity is also internally very important. So if you go to your boss and you pitch him an idea, think of what is in for him. Think of what is the problem he tries to solve. How can you make him shine with this? And if you have understood that and prepare your pitch around that he is an important piece of that innovation, then you will be more successful. Don't be too aggressive. Try to win them. And probably 3 out of 5 times you fail, but there will be 2 others which might want to take that and carry that on. So you have to try and never give up.
Yeah, it's a really good point in terms of how to convince management, because this is a topic I hear every single day. Especially in more traditional companies where the awareness of the management may not necessarily be always there. It's a really, really great piece that we just digged into. And alongside of that, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about, which is, in times of change now, or in times of innovation or whatever, when something changes and maybe there's, big investments coming with it or a commitment coming with it. First of all, how do you get people on board? I mean, we talked about management a little bit now, but then also how do you get people in the organization on board? How do you get people excited? How do you get people motivated to join you in this boat of transformation?
Well, I must say I was always lucky to have great teams around me. And if I go back in the example of PayMid Twint, the very first person who was working with me, he was totally the opposite of me. So meaning I'm more the guy who hates details. So I'm actually not very good in understanding why there must be risk awareness, why there must be compliance, etc., etc. So I want a guy in my team who's actually completing me. He was a guy who was good with banks, who was good in doing detail work, who was good on doing compliance stuff, etc., etc. And we together actually could ping pong the common vision we had. We wanted to make actually the world a better place with that. We started then to somehow show others, hey, this is something great which happened. And we started actually to go around and we scouted internally people who were very good in their job, which were very self-motivated, but which also were a little bit frustrated maybe. And we tried to win them to be part of our internal team. And this helped us actually really to get together a group of guys who really understand, hey, this is the vision, it is relevant, and I want to be a part of it, and it's great, and it's fun. So actually the biggest problem for me sometimes as a boss was more than telling people, please go home now, you have worked enough this week. So, and those self-motivated people, I think you find in every organization. And very often you must listen to them. It's always those who see the things you should do better. It's those guys who are always on every project and are always very, very busy. But those are the guys who want to really change something. And those you need to find and win for your vision and explain them why they should leave their daily business behind and thinking of changing the world for good. And actually now in my jobs, I very often go back to my old network, because I've been a lot together with people who really get things done, and I try to get them involved in it, and so somehow start a momentum again and showing others, hey, something is happening here. How can I be a part of this really good working team?
It's a really great point. Instead of trying to convince or motivate people, find the ones that are already motivated. It sounds very simple, but it's
no, I mean, have you ever? I never been into a process of Google, but if I hear they are recruiting for jobs for 6 to 8 months, I mean, why are they doing this? Because they're looking for the self-motivated people, probably, because they're looking for those guys who want to get things done and who are able to get things done. And before they are not very sure about this is the person who gets things done, this is the person who wants to get things done, they don't hire him. And that's why they probably are so good, because they are focusing on getting the right person, not just this person which is available as fast as possible.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, absolutely. And step two then, or sort of like they're inside of the change process now, and people are engaged, people really enjoy being part of it, and then stuff goes wrong and stuff gets more expensive and stuff goes off track, and there's difficult situations arise. How do you keep people engaged? I mean, is it sort of like organic that the self-motivated people, they always stay motivated until the end, or is there something more along the way that needs to happen?
Well, from my experience, it's first of all, work hard, party hard. So having celebration together is very important. It doesn't mean that when you're frustrated you have to drink. That's not what I want to say. But it's that you win together and you lose together, because you are a really good team. But what I also learned is, very often, I mean, those self-motivated team players, they're after 3 to 4 years, they're looking for something new, especially if it's been a big, exhausting project. They're looking for something new. And very often, I mean, this is also the moment where you need other people on the project, which can actually now scale it up. And you need a different kind of skill or in scaling up something, instead of just getting the project on the market and getting your first customer, then making it really, really running well. Yeah. And that's from my experience. So after 3 to 4 years, probably your team is changing, or at least I was always changing.
Yeah, it's a good insight, that, you need different kinds of people at different stages of the project, or even of growth of an organization. Yes. That's a really, really good point, because, I think it's something that we can easily forget, because, when the organization is done, it's there, right? And the environment changes. Sometimes it may not be very obvious that, our environment has changed, so that part of the organization is no longer in alignment with the stage of the organization. It's a really good point.
And what I also learned is, as soon as your innovation gets, successful, it gets also very political. And very often the really innovative people, they want to leave that, because they don't want to hear the political stuff. So that's why they say, well, I try to find my new project. I know I'm well educated. I actually don't need the money at the moment. I can actually look for my next job where I really want to work on. And those guys you want to hire.
Yeah, very good point. There's one more topic or one more question actually that I want to ask you. It's always a question that I like to ask at the very end. It's not necessarily perfectly in context what we talked about, but I always love to ask it. So let's imagine for now that you're 80 years old and you're sitting in your rocking chair looking back at your life and seeing all the things that have changed. Mobility is very different. And everything is and I know a lot of things have changed along the way. Looking back at that moment, what would you love to see that has changed in the world of business, wherever it may be?
Well, probably, I think that it shouldn't be an issue of gender or origin or religion, but rather than values of the person that brings with them, or what attitudes they have, which makes somebody a leader. I mean, that's probably my number one wish. Isn't it today Women's Day? Yeah, for example, why do we need to discuss that there must be a certain amount of women in the management? There just should be. I mean, look at the university. The majority of them is women who's coming out of university. So why is it not in the management? So I think if I'm 80, I hope actually that my 3 girls I will have by then, that there's no issue if they are a woman or a man, that they are maybe in a management position.
Love that picture. Thank you so much for sharing this, and thanks you so much for sharing everything you shared as part of this conversation, Thomas. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being part of this show, part of this episode.
Thanks for doing this.
Back again. Thank you so much. See you soon.
See you soon. Bye bye.